The U.S. Supreme Court ruled today that former President Donald Trump cannot be removed from the ballot in Colorado or any other state. It defeated decisions from several state courts that disqualified him from running because of the role he played in the January 6, 2021 insurrection on the U.S. Capitol. This means that Trump will appear on the ballot when thousands of voters head to the polls tomorrow on Super Tuesday.
I want to start by thanking the Supreme Court for its unanimous decision today.
Former U.S. President Donald Trump claiming a victory over today's Supreme Court ruling. In an historic decision, all 9 judges agreed he should be allowed on the ballot in Colorado, which brought the lawsuit forward, as well as every other state.
You cannot take somebody out of a race. The voters can take the person out of the race very quickly, but a court shouldn't be doing that, and the Supreme Court saw that very well, and I really do believe that will be a unifying factor.
Colorado lawyers argue that Trump's actions on January 6, 2021 violated the 14th Amendment. That says no one involved in an insurrection against the Capitol can hold office. Colorado points to speeches Trump made on January 6th, the day hundreds of his supporters stormed the Capitol to try and stop the transfer of power to Joe Biden after Trump lost the election.
We're going to walk down anyone you want, but I think right here we're going to walk down to the Capitol because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength and you have to be strong.
Colorado removed him from the ballot, and Maine and Illinois also followed suit. But the Supreme Court says only Congress, not individual states, can make that decision.
And ultimately, this decision leaves open the door for Congress to act, to pass authorizing legislation. But we know that Congress is a nearly non-functioning body. So ultimately, it will be up to the American voters to save our democracy in November.
What the courts didn't weigh in on is whether Trump's actions on January 6th are considered an insurrection, leaving that up to other courts to decide.
Not a single one of the 9 justices second-guessed the decisions by the Colorado courts that Donald Trump had engaged in insurrection. And so even though it made procedural determinations that Colorado as a state couldn't enforce Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, the issue of Donald Trump's eligibility for the office of the presidency remains very much a live issue.
The Supreme Court's 3 liberal judges also released their own opinion, saying that while they agreed Trump should be allowed on Colorado's ballot, they worry this ruling will insulate all alleged insurrectionists from future challenges by limiting the power to enforce it. The decision comes on the eve of Super Tuesday, which will see thousands of Americans head to the polls as 15 states hold their primary elections. Trump has a commanding lead for the Republican seat. His only remaining challenger, Nikki Haley, won her first and only primary in D.C. yesterday. Spending her Super Tuesday Eve in Texas, she told the crowd that she wants Trump on the ballot so she can beat him fair and square. Joining us now to provide some insight on the Supreme Court ruling is the director of the Center of Leadership and Media Studies at the University of Mary Washington, Stephen Farnsworth. Stephen, how does this ruling change the election and tomorrow's Super Tuesday primaries?
The main thing that the Supreme Court decided to do today was to set up the process to proceed with Donald Trump on the ballot. Now, that's where the status quo was, right? But there was some question about whether or not some of the individual states would be able to take Donald Trump off the primary ballot. The Supreme Court basically finishes that question. It settles this matter. Donald Trump will be on the ballot in the primaries for all of the states.
Do you see this having an impact on voters' decisions?
Well, it seems to me that the real question for Donald Trump is whether or not there are going to be any criminal trials for him this year, and what will be the results of those trials. That's the big question. This question of whether or not Trump should be on the ballot was something that was pretty expected. The Supreme Court made it pretty clear during the questions that they asked during the oral argument a few weeks ago that there was going to be a majority to support Donald Trump staying on the ballot. This doesn't resolve the question of whether Trump participated in the insurrection or not. The court just said this is not the way to determine whether Trump is guilty of something that would invalidate his claim to be the candidate for president this year.
Well, that leads into my next question. Why do you think the court avoided touching on whether Trump's actions on January 6, 2021 are covered by the Insurrectionist Act?
Well, it seems to me that the court wanted to speak with unanimity to the maximum extent possible. And so leaving the question of evidence to a lower court for some of the cases that are pending against the former president right now is probably the smart move for the court in this case. If you go down the road of evidence on the question of whether or not Trump would be in violation of any of the claims relating to insurrection, the Supreme Court isn't the place to really give that the first consideration. U.S. district courts, lower courts in the federal system are a much better place for that to happen. And the court, I think, quite wisely deferred that question to those lower courts, which have cases pending on some of those issues.
The court was unanimous on its main decision to allow Trump on the ballot, but was more divided on other points. Where do the judges disagree?
Right. The unanimity was on the question of whether Trump should be removed from the ballot or not. And that's 9-0. He should be able to remain on the ballot. The individual justices, though, were raising the questions in some of the other concurring opinions about whether or not Congress has to act. There may be an opportunity perhaps for the courts to act on this question of whether this qualifies. And so that's a decision that doesn't really impact the immediate issue of whether Trump should be on the ballot or not. There was agreement that he should be. But the longer term questions, I think, of exactly how one would invalidate a presidential candidate for the insurrection matter, why that's something that the court has offered some disagreement on. But that's an issue for another day and another case.
Will this have an impact on other charges Trump is facing, or the question of presidential immunity, which is also in front of the Supreme Court right now?
No, everything else is going to be handled separately in other cases, in other jurisdictions. And so the Supreme Court will be able to consider some of the other trial outcomes later on. But for now, the immediate question, the question of whether or not Trump is a candidate for president in 2024, was settled today. He is a candidate. And of course, if you look ahead to Super Tuesday, it's quite clear that Donald Trump is well on his way to being the Republican nominee, even with all these criminal charges facing him as he goes through 2024.
Thanks for joining us today on Trending Now, Stephen.
Thank you.